The crystal decanter slipped from Claire Whitfield's fingers and shattered on the study floor. Whiskey fanned across the rug. The room smelled of leather tobacco and something bitter that pinched the back of her throat. The long case clock in the corner ticked like a hammer on iron. Father. She was already at his chair. Judge Thomas Whitfield convulsed foam at the corner of his mouth. His eyes found her unfocused and bright with pain. He clawed at his collar as if it were strangling him. Hattie Claire shouted toward the hall, "Help!" He gripped her wrist hard. Hot breath hit her ear. Vault. His jaw clenched. A tremor rolled through his body. Hollis. Do not trust. His free hand fumbled inside his waistcoat and pressed something into her palm. Brass kissed her skin cold and heavy. "Father, I am here." She tried to lift him. The clock ticked. The scent of bitter almonds would not leave the air. His fingers loosened. A last shudder crossed him, then a long, rattling breath. Silence took the room thick as wool. Footsteps creaked in the hallway. Claire's head snapped up. The doorway stood open. The corridor beyond looked empty, but she felt eyes on her. "Who is there?" she called. No answer. The sound of retreating boots moved away down the runner, quick and soft. Hattie Collins' hurried and breathless apron spattered with flour. She saw the judge and stopped one hand to her chest. "Oh, child." Her voice broke. "Oh, no." Claire could not speak. She stared at her father's face, then at the object in her fist. A brass key with an ornate bow worked like a flower. Its teeth were sharp enough to mark her skin. Cinder Hollow buried its judge 3 days later under a mist that turned black veils to wet silk. The church bell tolled. The courthouse bell answered. Mud clung to boots and the hems of skirts. The world smelled of wet earth and coal smoke. Claire kept her eyes on the coffin. She felt the rain beat on her gloves and run off like quicksilver. A mason jar set on the fence rail caught rainwater. It clouded where it touched the iron band. Silas Beckett reached her first at the grave. He carried a monogrammed handkerchief and the sweet reek of imported cologne. Silver hair, bright eyes, a mouth that smiled without softening. "My dear Claire," he said, both hands swallowing hers. "Your father and I were as brothers. The town will not be the same." His grip pressed bone. She nodded once. The church bell tolled again. Her jaw ached. Miles Beckett stepped in smoothly taller, colder, the lines of his suit too perfect for a graveyard. His gaze settled and weighed. "Miss Whitfield," he said, polite and distant. "A grief like this leaves a house hard to manage. There are ways to make it easier." "I manage," Claire said. "Of course," Miles said, and smiled without warmth. Silas placed a fatherly hand over both of theirs. "There are matters, unfortunately, that cannot grieve. Your father's account with Beckett and Company stands at $75,000. I will not dwell on numbers here. I will only say we have always been neighbors. Neighbors find solutions." 1 week, he added softly, as if offering a kindness. "We will speak then." Across the yard, under a wind-twisted cypress, 2 men stood apart from the mourners. One had a pale scar through his left eyebrow. Both wore plain trail coats. They watched without pretending not to. Hattie followed Claire's glance and tightened her lips. "Rafe and Jonah Hollis," she murmured. "Keep your distance." "Do you know them?" Claire asked. "Enough," Hattie said, and shifted her basket to her other arm. "They bring trouble to their own door and to any house that opens to them." The procession thinned. The rain lightened to a silver dust. Silas raised Claire's hand again and squeezed. 1 week, he repeated. That night, the study looked scrubbed of death. Hattie had sent the broken decanter to the bin and lit the lamps lower than usual. Claire stood where the clock ticked, and the rug still held a dark stain the soap had not quite chased. She closed her fingers around the brass key until its teeth stung her palm. Her mother's portrait hung over the mantel, a young woman with steady eyes and a spray of painted larkspur at her shoulder. Claire lifted the frame down and leaned it against the chair. Cold breathed from the wall. A steel circle waited there, small as a pie plate set into the wood paneling. The keyhole looked like a black eye. Claire slid the key in. It turned cleanly. The steel door gave with a soft throat sound. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, a thin notebook pressed with a cipher on its plain cover, and a rolled map tied in red ribbon. Claire drew the ledger first. The handwriting was her father's, spare and exact. Names and sums and dates columns neat as rails. The notebook would not give itself up at a glance. The map crackled when she untied it. A vein traced in red ink crossed their land like a scar. Larkspur Vein. A circle sat west near Juniper Creek. Beside it, in her father's hand, someone had written, "No excavation. Danger." Footsteps again, closer this time. Claire's eyes went to the open wall. She put the ledger and notebook under the window seat cushion and slipped the map flat against her bodice. She swung the portrait back into place and wiped her hands down her skirt to dry the sweat. The study door opened. Silas filled the frame hat in hand, smile fixed. Miles followed, cool as shadow. Edwin Parrish, the family attorney, came last, his spectacles fogged from the damp. Claire, Silas said, as if he had never waited for an invitation in his life. Forgive the hour. Circumstances are what they are. Mr. Beckett, Claire said. Mr. Miles, Mr. Parrish. Edwin's eyes would not meet hers. He spread a small packet of papers on the desk and cleared his throat. The judge left instructions that, given the unusual, we should review certain matters in private. What matters? Claire asked. Notes, Silas said gently. Collateral. Your father's signature on sums that grew faster than any of us expected. The Larkspur operation has been hungry. Hungry for what Claire said. Regents, labor, time. Silas tapped the edge of one document with a ring that flashed like a blade. And patience, which banks have in quantity until they do not. The note comes due in 3 months, Edwin said quietly. Technically, but the situation is delicate. Miles set his fingertips on the leather of her father's chair. He was close enough that Claire could smell the starch in his cuffs. My father is prepared to be generous, he said, given the history between our families. Define generous, Claire said. Miles's smile sharpened a fraction. A union. It would place both houses under one name and simplify all obligations. It would preserve what matters to you. It would resolve what matters to us. Hattie's voice moved in the hall, then quieted. The clock ticked. Claire thought of rain beating on gloves and turning iron water cloudy. She thought of a brass key in her palm too cold for any night in June. She looked at Edwin, and if I decline, Edwin swallowed. Then the bank would proceed as banks must. I wish I had better news. Silas lifted both hands, a showman ending a trick. I am not your enemy, child. I am a neighbor. Do not mistake firmness for malice. Neighbors do not enter uninvited at night, Claire said. His smile did not falter. Grief makes hours strange. 1 week. Then we will speak like sensible people. He reached to pat her shoulder. She stepped back. For a fraction of a moment the mask slipped. Something cold looked out from behind his eyes. Then it was gone. They left as if they owned the hallway. Edwin paused, hat to his chest, and whispered, I am sorry, without looking straight at her. Claire stood still until the front door clicked and the night settled again. She set her palm flat on the portrait frame. Her breath came slow and shallow. The clock ticked. The bitter smell lingered as stubborn as a memory. She knelt and pulled the ledger and notebook from their hiding place. The ledger's pages rasped under her thumb. S in the margin. B in the margin. Sometimes both together. She would need a teacher to untie the cipher. She would need time she did not have. She turned to cross the rug and stopped. A thin ribbon of mud tracked across the Persian pattern from the door to the hearth, then veered toward the window. The marks were small and sharp at the toe, smooth at the heel. Not the square, heavy print of Silas's boots. Not Miles's narrow heel. Someone had stood where she stood now while her father died. Someone had watched and slipped away. The courthouse bell tolled once. Out in the dark, the sound walked across town and laid a hand on the Whitfield house. Claire looked at the brass key in her palm and at the mud that would not dry. She closed the door to the study and set the bolt with a click that felt too loud. She did not sleep. Claire did not light a lamp. She watched pale dawn work its way across the ceiling plaster, then rose and found Hattie in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled and her hands sunk to the wrists in dough. Yeast and warm milk filled the room. The stove clicked as the iron took heat. You have not slept, Hattie said without looking up. I will sleep later. Claire poured coffee and drank it black. I'm going to town. Hattie's eyes lifted. Take Tom with you. The roads are greasy this morning. I will be faster alone. Hattie pinched the dough into neat rounds. She set one on the tray and wiped her hands. Fast is not safe. Claire kissed her cheek and stepped out into air that still remembered the night. The front grass shone with dew. Cinder Hollow sat small and dusty at the foot of the hill roofs, lifting out of a low fog that lay in the hollows like a sheet. The courthouse bell gave a single stroke. It sounded tired. She drove the light buggy instead of the carriage. The mare breathed steam. Hooves clicked against stone where the slope cut through a bank of granite. When the road leveled, the town gathered itself a dozen streets in a loose grid, a church spire, a bank with a clean face of white stone that pretended it had been there forever. Claire tied off at the livery and walked the boardwalk. The glass at the apothecary flashed dark green. She meant to buy iodine and not talk to anyone. Then she saw Hattie cut across the street with her marketing basket on her arm. Hattie did not look toward the storefronts. She kept to the shade and slipped down the narrow run between the apothecary and the milliner where rain barrels lived and the back steps were scarred by boots. Claire followed as far as the corner and stopped where a crate gave her cover. The alley smelled like damp wood and carbolic. Edwin Parrish stood in the shadow with his hat pressed close to his chest. His spectacles had a bruise of fog along the bottoms. "If he learns these have gone missing," Edwin said barely above a whisper, "we are both finished." Hattie took a small brown-wrapped parcel and pushed it into her basket. "I will keep them where he cannot reach," she said. "Claire is in danger while they remain in his desk." Edwin stared at the far bricks. "I cannot do more. Tell her to be careful with her questions. Mr. Beckett's patience does not extend to graves." Hattie glanced once toward the sunlight. "I have lived long enough to know the difference between a neighbor and a wolf," she said. "I will see to my girl." Claire stepped back before Hattie could see her and made a slow circle to the mercantile. She let Hattie find her there among the flour sacks and folded calico. "You could have told me," Claire said softly. Hattie looked at her for a long beat. Then she reached into her basket and drew out a tiny glass vial with a cork the size of a pea. Clear liquid kissed the glass. "2 drops in wine," she said, eyes steady. "You will look as if fever has taken you. Red cheeks heat at the eyes, sweat above the lip. You may leave a table without offense." Claire capped the vial in her palm. "You have been full of surprises." "I have been alone for a long time," Hattie said. "A woman learns." Claire left the mercantile with bandages and salt. The bank clock across the street clicked toward 10. Mr. Wilkes stood under the arch of Beckett and Company's doors, like a man set to stop an ox. He stepped aside when he saw her and held the door as if it pained him. Inside was marble and hush. A woman with a ledger at the front desk pretended not to see. Claire set her gloves on the polished counter. "I would like to review my father's accounts," she said. Mr. Wilkes's smile was a wire. "Miss Whitfield, I am very sorry. Mr. Beckett has requested that access be limited while we reconcile end states. These are my household accounts." "They are now estate documents," he said, voice even. "I will need Mr. Beckett's permission." "Then fetch it," a softer voice answered from behind her. "No need. I am here." Miles Beckett's reflection leaned in the glass case that held safety deposit boxes. He moved like a dancer uses a floor light and exact. He bowed the exact amount that respect requires and no more. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "if you are well enough to be in town today, perhaps you are well enough to join my father and me for supper tomorrow evening. We can show you exactly where matters stand." His gaze flicked to Mr. Wilkes, who dropped his eyes. Claire felt the small vial warm where it rested against her glove. 7 o'clock, she said. "If Hattie is available to accompany me." Miles's mouth did not quite change. "As you wish." Outside the bank, the street had filled with miners walking off shift. Their boots wrote quick strokes of mud on the planks. A team snorted past the trace chains ringing. The courthouse bell tolled twice. Claire thought of the ledger in the wall and the map pressed to her bodice the night before. She thought of water in jars turning cloudy when it touched iron. She drove the buggy out of town and cut east, where the willow growth marked the edges of Willow Flats. Fields lay wide and tired. The soil had a crust like ash. A scarecrow leaned as if it had decided to sit. The little white schoolhouse sat on a rise, its paint grayed by sun and wind. Children poured out when the bell clanged for noon. They shouted and ran the dusty yard. A few coughed with a deep sound that did not belong in small chests. A girl filled a jar from a pump by the steps and held it up. The water looked clear at first, then bloomed a faint milkiness where it kissed the rim. Abigail Morse stood in the doorway with chalk dust on her fingers. She was taller than Claire expected, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Whitfield," she said, neither welcoming nor cold. "We do not often see the judge's family in Willow Flats." "The judge's family owes you more than a visit," Claire said, and took the thin notebook from her reticule. The cipher on the cover caught the light in a quiet way. "I need a mind that likes puzzles." Abigail turned a few pages, nodded without commitment, and tucked the notebook under her arm. "My students leave at 3, she said. "I have evenings. Give me 2 nights. "You will do it," Claire said. Abigail's mouth moved toward a smile and did not arrive. "I will read. Decide later if I will help." Her gaze slid to the pump. "Children's smaller cups," she called. "Do not gulp." A boy in a cap too big for him shuffled up the steps and tugged Claire's sleeve. He smelled like horses and dust. "Beg pardon, ma'am," he said, and held out a folded scrap. "A man paid me a nickel to give you this. Said to tell you to be quick." Claire opened the note. The hand was tidy and spare. "Do not return alone. Storage barn burned in the night. A warning. We will watch the Juniper Creek Road at sundown. R. Hollis." Her throat went dry. Sweat stood between her shoulder blades, though a breeze had come up off the flats. She read it again to see if the words would change. They did not. Miss Whitfield Abigail said quietly, "Your color went out and came back again. What does the paper say?" "My home," Claire said. "Someone set fire on our land." Abigail looked at the sky. A hawk hung over the field and rode a circle. "Our sheriff does not hurry unless he is told to," she said. "I would not count on Mr. Dugan if I were dying on his steps." "I never have," Claire said. She pressed a coin into the boy's palm. "If a man comes asking whether you delivered that, tell him you lost it in the dust." The boy nodded as if she had taught him a game and ran for his friends. On the way back toward town, the road pinched between Juniper Creek and a wall of stone. The creek ran low and green, its surface broken by the flat backs of rocks, and a trout that flashed once and vanished. A buck burst from the willow tangle with its eyes wide and white-rimmed. The mare shied hard and the buggy went with her. The world turned. Claire hit the dirt with the whole length of her side. Pain bit her ankle and ran like a wire up her shin. The buggy slewed on one wheel and dropped with a crack that sounded like a pistol. The mare tore her traces and bolted toward the bend with the shafts dragging. For a moment there was only the sound of the creek and her breath in her ears. Then hooves steady and controlled coming around the corner at a walk, not a run. Two riders slid out of the glare and pulled up sharp. The scar on the left man's eyebrow caught the light. Both had that lean look of men who sleep outside and eat fast. "Miss Whitfield," the scarred one said, "you look like you need a hand." "Rafe Hollis," Claire said, "we have not met." "Not proper," he said and swung down. He crouched and touched the swelling at her ankle with the back of his fingers. Sprain, not a break. He did not look up when he said, "Jonah, look at that rut." Jonah had already gone to one knee where the wheel had dug in. He ran his thumb along the edge of a shallow trench and lifted it. His skin came up wet with something that glistened thicker than water. "Grease," he said. "Fresh. Someone laid it on the slope to see a buggy slide." Rafe's jaw tightened. He offered his forearm. "Can you stand?" Claire took it. Heat and strength moved under his skin like coiled rope. She pushed up and bit back a sound. The world tilted and steadied. "I was on my way to the bank," she managed. Rafe's mouth flattened. "Mr. Beckett knows you are curious. He has men who make a business of watching doors." "Is that a courtesy or a warning?" Claire asked. "A custom," Rafe said. "We offer both." Jonah led his horse closer and loosened a stirrup. "We can get you to town," he said. "You sit with me. Rafe will take your reins." His eyes were bright and kind before they went sharp again. "Saturday noon. Crow's Nest Cabin. Ask your questions where ears do not grow under doors." Claire felt the note against her palm like a hot coal. "I may come sooner than that." Rafe helped her into the saddle behind Jonah and stepped away. For the space of one breath, his expression softened. Then the guard came back down. He checked the cinch out of habit, though he had checked it already. "Hold to the horn," he said. "I will not let you fall." They moved slow, the horses sure-footed along the bad stretch, then quicker when the road widened. Rafe scanned the trees and the creek as if trouble could grow like grass. At the livery, he lifted Claire down in one smooth motion and set her on the planks. "Think hard about who you trust," he said. "Some men in this town wear other men's faces." She opened her mouth to answer, but the brothers had already turned their horses and were gone, leaving dust to settle where they had been. Claire limped to the bank to keep her appointment in silence and came away with only a supper invitation and the taste of bile. She stopped at the general store for a small pistol that sat cool and heavy in her reticule. The man behind the counter did not ask questions. He wrapped the cartridges in brown paper and nodded once. On the way to the buggy, she passed the schoolyard again. The children had gone. Abigail stood by the pump with the notebook open to its second page, lips, moving eyes narrowed. She did not look up. The courthouse bell tolled 5 times. Each stroke seemed to hang longer than the last, as if the sound did not want to leave. At the corner of Main and Willow, a different boy than before darted in front of her like a sparrow. He thrust another folded slip and ran without waiting for a coin. The paper had the same spare hand. "Do not return alone. Men on the Juniper approach. Storage barn gone to cinders. We will watch the road at sundown. R. Hollis." Claire breathed once, then twice. The clock on Beckett's bank showed near 3. The light had a hard edge that meant the hottest part of the day would be early and the evening would fall quick. She turned her face toward the hill where her house sat behind its elms and red roof and thought of Hattie of Tom of the hidden door in the study wall. She felt the brass key in her pocket and the glass vial in her glove. Somewhere beyond the bank, water ran under boards and out to the creek carrying silt and the smell of iron. The bell in the courthouse tower finished its 5th stroke and left the air thin and bright. Claire cut off the main road above Juniper Creek. and took the pasture track that ran behind the cottonwoods. The hill rose slow. Smoke reached her before the view did that campfire sour that meant wet wood and old timbers. At the crest, she saw the storage barn as a black rib cage. Posts leaned and glowed at the joints. The roof had fallen in on the wheat bins. A ribbon of smoke curled into a sky the color of pewter. Tom O'Rourke stood with a rake on his shoulder, shirt dark at the collar, hair stuck to his forehead. He turned when the buggy squealed. "Miss Claire," he called, "you are whole." "I'm fine," she said, Hattie. "In the kitchen trying to keep from marching down to the sheriff with a ladle," Tom said. "She has opinions. So do I." Claire climbed down, kept weight off her bad ankle, and stepped into the churned mud. Heat still lifted from the earth. The smell of old hay and char sat heavy in her mouth. "What did the sheriff say?" she asked. Tom spat into the weeds. "Sheriff Dugan said it was an accident. Lightning. He was looking at blue sky when he said it." "Lightning in fair weather," Claire said. Tom's jaw bunched. He did not walk 2 steps past the gate. Claire crouched at the threshold. The ash lay in scallops where the wind had moved it. Near the door she found a scatter of pebbled glass from a lamp and a shine that caught the eye, not water thicker. She touched it with a knuckle. Oil clung to her skin and smelled like pitch. "Lantern oil," Tom said. "Plenty of it, set in 3 places. Any fool could see." Footprints led from the packed dirt beyond the door toward the lane. Not Tom's square, not Hattie's neat half-circles. Narrow heel, pointed toe, the sort a man buys when he has money and cares if you notice. The front door banged. Hattie came fast across the yard skirt, pinned up flour on her sleeve where she had wiped her hands in haste. "Do not you dare step into that rubble," she said, then pulled Claire into her arms, hard enough to squeeze the breath. "You smell like smoke now. I hate it." "Sheriff Dugan thinks it was the work of thunder," Claire said. Hattie's face went still, all the softness gone, only steel. "He thinks what Silas pays him to think." "It will not stop with a barn," Claire said. Hattie's mouth pressed thin. "Then we will lock what we can and carry what will burn, and you will not sleep in the front rooms." Sheriff Amos Dugan came while they talked, hat in hand, polite as a fence post. He looked at the burned bones of the barn from the gate and made a sound that might have been wonder. "A shame," he said. "Dry as it has been. 1 spark and there you are." 3 sparks, Claire said. Dugan smiled as if she had told a joke. "Best to keep buckets filled. I will send a man to make a note." He left without crossing the yard. Tom watched him go with his lips peeled off his teeth, then went to fetch water for the mare. Inside the house felt outraged, but trying not to show it. The study lamps were cold. Claire closed the curtains and drew the bolt again, though she knew a bolt meant little. She set her palm to the frame of her mother's portrait. The metal behind it hummed against her skin with the day's heat trapped in the wall. Hattie came in with a small brass key cupped in her hand. "From under the linen in his room," she said. "He told me once there was a box he would need in a hurry. I did not ever ask where." Claire took the key. The head was simple around with 3 small nicks filed into it to mark it from others. They went to Judge Whitfield's room together. The curtains were drawn there too. The air smelled like pipe smoke and starch. Claire found the loose floorboard near the window by the shadow line it made at the edge. She lifted it with her fingernails and set it aside on the rug. The iron box waited in a cradle of dust. The key turned with a grind that felt like the house had clenched and then let go. Inside lay a single envelope, edges yellowed and soft, her father's name on the front, in a hand, not his. There was a photograph under the flap, the corners bent. Claire slid the letter out and unfolded it. The paper was thin, the ink brown. She read with the feeling of walking through water. Each sentence pushed at her and slowed her, and then let her through to the next. "My dearest Thomas, Harrison has learned of us. He has said things that make my bones shake. I will not have him make good on them. I am leaving at dusk. You must not follow. Think of your child. I will be fine where the river bends past the old mill. Burn this letter. Keep the picture if you must. He has never walked that meadow and would not know it even if he saw it. All my love. Evelyn." The photograph showed a young woman beside a shallow stream. A spray of larkspur grew at her elbow. She was turned a little from the camera as if the flash would catch her and hold her if she looked into it. Her dress was simple and clean. Her mouth had the beginning of a smile that did not quite come. "Evelyn Harper Hattie," said softly. "She had land east of the Hollis place when I was new to this house, Rafe and Jonah's mother." Claire pressed the picture to her chest and felt the press of the map there too. She looked down at the loop of her ankle bandage and the faint ash on her skirt and did not trust her voice for a moment. "Silas wanted her," Hattie said. "She did not want him. A man like that confuses want with right." Claire slid the letter back into the envelope and the envelope into the box, then locked the lid with a motion that felt like closing a door you do not ever wish to open. She set the board back and smoothed the rug. "I am invited to supper tomorrow," she said. "I intend to go." Hattie's eyes flashed. "You will not go alone." "I will go with what you gave me," Claire said, and touched the glass vial in her pocket. Hattie reached up and fixed a loose pin in Claire's hair with hands that shook just once. "If you feel threatened," she said, "do not try to be brave at a table full of men." Night came with a wind that smelled like sage. Claire lay awake to the sound of Tom on the porch steps and Hattie moving in the kitchen. Once she got up and walked the hall with the pistol cold in her hand. Once she stood with her palm on the study door and listened with her whole skin. The next day passed as if it had a bit in its teeth and did not care for her hands on the reins. At 6, a hired carriage came up the drive. The driver had a clean shirt and bad nerves. Hattie tucked a shawl around Claire's shoulders as if the night might change its mind and become winter. The Beckett house sat on a rise outside town and made a show of height. Columns that served no purpose but pried windows, large enough for a man to walk through if he did not mind glass. Lamps burned behind every curtain. Servants passed on quiet feet. The air smelled like beef braised in wine, and the powders ladies buy to hide their dead sleep. Silas met her at the door with his hands out. His cufflinks had tiny stones that picked up the lamplight and scattered it careless of where it fell. "Claire," he said, warm enough to butter bread. "Come in from the chill. You look pale. We will put red in your cheeks." In the parlor, a fire hissed. Miles stood by the mantel with a glass he did not drink. He bowed and offered the appropriate words. Claire took a small sherry and held it to warm it. She let Silas talk. He could fill a room with a voice when he wanted to and soften it to a private murmur when the shape of the chair changed. They ate in a room wide enough to lose your voice in. A chandelier made the silverware throw sparks. Courses arrived and departed like trains on a schedule. Silas spoke of enterprise and obligation. He drew lines in the air with his fork for veins underground and called it hope. Claire sipped wine, set it down, and let her fingers cover the rim. Her other hand found the tiny vial. She lifted it. 2 drops slid into the dark. She lifted the glass and drank. Heat rose under her skin, slow and deliberate. Her cheeks burned. Her pulse stepped up 1 floor. She put the back of her hand to her forehead and let a little sound escape. "My dear," Silas said, "you are flushed." "The air is heavy," Claire said. "I should like to step into the hall." "Of course," Silas said. "Take a moment. We can finish our talk when you feel yourself." In the corridor, the sound of the party fell away. The runner muffled her steps. She found a quiet corner where a painted vase watched the absence of people. Her breath slowed. The heat climbed and then leveled like a fever that did not want to leave yet. A woman's voice came from the shadow near the servants' stairs. "Miss Whitfield." Claire turned. A young woman with dark hair and a faint scar down one cheek stood half in the light from the foyer. Her dress was neat and plain. Her eyes were clean of pretense. "Rosa Delgado," she said. "I work in this house." Claire waited. "You are in danger," Rosa said. "Men will go to your home tonight and search it. They will not care what they break. Do not be there. Do not let papers be there." "Why tell me?" Claire asked. Rosa's mouth cut toward a smile and stopped. "Because I know what it is to hear a lie about a fall. My sister did not slip from any rock. I am tired of the smell of this house. Take this." She pressed a small brass key into Claire's palm. Its shape was odd, the bit cut squared like a little step. "Back entrance to Mr. Beckett's study," Rosa said. "If you need the truth, it lives on his desk at odd hours. The house will be busy tomorrow with visitors. The paper you need sits in a drawer that does not show until you press the molding by your right knee." Soft footfalls moved toward them. Rosa went flat into the shadow and slid past like water. Claire tucked the key deep. Miles appeared at the bend in the hall. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes," Claire said. "Thank you." The heat lifted. He nodded and glanced toward the front door, where a footman signaled that the carriage waited. "Shall I have you driven home?" "That would be kind," Claire said. The night outside came cool as if the day had never happened. The stars had the hard edges you get when the air is dry. Claire stepped into the carriage and sat for one breath, then leaned forward and touched the driver's sleeve. "Take me to the fork where the trail cuts south," she said. "Not the front gate when you return. I want no gossip." The driver looked at her in the glass and found a coin in his imagination. "Yes, miss." At the fork, she stepped down into dust. The driver touched his hat and turned the rig back toward the lamps. Claire stood a moment and let the silence choose her. Then she crossed the ditch and found the old path that ran between Greasewood and Pignon, the one that lifted into the low hills behind the Beckets and dropped toward timber where the air went green and damp. The moon was late. Her eyes made work of the dark until the path widened and the scent of pine took her like a hand. Knife Edge lay to the east, a pale seam where rock showed itself. She turned west instead and followed a thread of wagon ruts no one had cared about in years. After a narrow turn, the trees opened and a black square took shape against the lighter dark. A roofline, a porch rail. Crow's Nest cabin quiet as if it had been left alone for a season. Claire stepped onto the first plank. It answered with a long, dry complaint. She slid the small pistol from her reticule and held it low. A lamp glow breathed around the edges of the door, very faint. She lifted her hand to knock. The door eased inward on its own. A broad shape filled the space shoulders against the frame face in shadow with lamplight behind it. "You are early," Rafe Hollis said, "by 2 days." Rafe stepped back to let her in. Crow's Nest held the clean smell of pine and lamp oil. A kettle clicked once on the iron plate. Jonah sat at the table with a map spread under his hands. He rose when he saw her worry and relief sharing the same line in his mouth. "You brought trouble on a short rope," he said. "They burned our barn," Claire said. "Rosa says men are headed to the house tonight. She gave me a key to your neighbor's sins." Rafe's eyes went to her hand. She opened her palm and showed the odd-cut bit of brass. The lamp found the edges and made them look sharp. "Back door to Silas's study," she said. "Drawer hidden under the right knee. She says the paper lives there." Jonah pulled in a breath. "Rosa has eyes," he said. "She has reasons." Rafe poured water into a tin cup and set it in front of Claire. It tasted of iron and wood. "Sit," he said. "Tell us every step between noon and now." She did careful and flat so none of the pieces slid off the table. The alley, Edwin's parcel, Hattie's vial, Mr. Wilkes at the bank, Miles's invitation, Willow Flats, Abigail's careful eyes, the note about the barn, the greased rut. Rafe listened with his hands quiet on the back of the chair across from her. When she finished, he set a small box on the boards. Inside lay papers pressed thin by weight and a glass vial the size of a thumb. "Requisitions that do not match deliveries," he said. Silas skims. He pays officials to see what he wishes them to see. He pays a man for other work, too. He tapped the edge of a receipt. Initialed M. The number is not tiny. The memo line reads as if it were a favor to a friend. Claire looked at the vial. The light made it look harmless. "What is it?" "Arsenic trioxide," Jonah said. "White and neat. Enough in a pinch to put a man in the ground quiet." Rosa took this from a drawer in Silas's study. Miles told a man to throw it in the creek. The man did not. Claire's fingers tightened around the cup. "My father tasted bitter almonds," she said. It rode the air like a perfume. Rafe's gaze moved to the far window, to the strip of dark trees. "He was a man who could be wrong and then try to be right," he said. "He came to us a week ago, wanted help to end a thing he had started, and could not steer anymore. He did not bring you because he thought the hurt would stop with him." "He knew my mother had not died clean," Claire said, and told them about Evelyn's letter. The iron box, the meadow by the bend, the photograph. Hattie's quiet voice naming a woman who had chosen and been punished for it. Jonah swore softly. Rafe closed his eyes for a breath. "She was our mother," he said. "No one has said her name in that house for years." "You knew," Claire said. "Not at first," Rafe said. "We came home with army dust still on our boots and found land that did not match the lines we remembered. We found a town that bowed and smiled and took. We learned late and hard." The kettle began to whisper. Jonah took it off the heat and poured water over coffee grounds in a dented pot. The smell rose and sat in the cabin like a promise of morning. "Men will come," Rafe said. "Greased ruts do not lay themselves. We need Miss Whitfield not here when they do." "I will not be here," Claire said. "I will be at Knife Edge with 4 men at my back or none." Jonah tilted his head. "Bait," he said. "Draw them off," Claire said. "Lose them in the stone if I can. Rosa knows where to find me. She told me so." Rafe's mouth tugged at one corner. "You assume much." Claire rose. The room felt small with her breath in it. "I assume the same men who lit my barn will want to tell me how to pay my debts," she said. "I would rather choose my ground." She steadied herself with a hand on the table and found Rafe's hand there too. His fingers were warm and calloused. They did not flinch. "Do not be brave for its own sake," he said. "I am not brave," she said. "I am cornered." Jonah left at first dark, headed for the house and the school with a soft call of goodbye and a promise to use the back trails. Rafe damped the lamp and stood by the door until his brother's horse had gone to a shadow that could have been any other. Then he turned back to Claire as if there were still and always work to do. He set her ankle on a chair and wrapped it tighter. The cloth pulled steady around bone and swelling. The pain eased to a thick heat. His head bowed, the line of his throat plain in the low light. She watched his hands move sure in their work, as if they had learned care the same place they had learned harm. "If they catch you," he said, not looking up, "lie if it saves your skin." "I will not give them what sits in my head," she said. "I did not ask that," he said. Late Jonah came back wrong. The door pushed in, and he was there, white around the mouth. Blood had made a dark shape across his shirt. His hat was gone. His eyes were bright with pain and anger both. "On the road from Willow Flats," he said, breath cut into pieces. 4 at least. They were waiting in the juniper. They think you ran for Denver. They will learn otherwise when they find your horse tracks and none for a carriage." He swayed. Rafe took his weight and set him down. He looked at the wound with a soldier's economy. "Through and through," he said. "You will live if you stop trying to talk." They worked fast hands, sure. The water steamed. The needle flashed. Jonah bit on leather and said nothing. Claire held the lamp and kept the light steady. Blood made a slow flower on clean cloth and then stopped. "We cannot move him," Rafe said. "Then move me," Claire said. "Let me take what follows where you are not." Rafe tied off the bandage. His eyes finally met hers. Whatever he wanted to say stood behind the line of his teeth and did not come through. "Take the bay," he said. "The mare is still afraid." Outside, the night smelled like sage again. The moon had risen and laid a path along the creek. Claire mounted with both hands and grit. Rafe put a folded packet in her saddlebag. "If you are forced to drop anything," he said, "do not drop this." The leather was warm. She did not open it. 2 days, he said almost to himself. She leaned down and kissed him. It was quick, more breath than lips. Heat jumped under her skin and settled. He touched her jaw once and let go. She rode east toward Knife Edge. The hills humped their dark backs under the stars. Grass hissed at the stirrups. The canyon opened like a mouth. Stone rose on both sides and held the sound of the creek close. She made sure her horse stepped where any man could see the prints. Behind her came the echo of other hooves, fast now, voices clipped and hard. Bullets began to worry the air. One kissed rock and sang, another tore brush and was gone. Claire put her hand on the bay's neck and felt the body gather and stretch. She cut left into a side passage where the rock ran smooth and tight, then right where a screen of willow let her through and would not be kind to a rider who did not slow. At a box end, she swung down and slapped the horse hard. It bolted the other way. The echo of hooves beat a tattoo and pulled the shouting with it. Claire slipped into a slit in the stone and followed a seam that smelled like cold and dust. A cave opened enough for a person and not much else. She went in until the air pressed her ears and sat with her back to the wall. Her breath came loud and then quieted. The pistol sat across her knees. Sometime toward morning, a soft scuff reached her. A voice followed low and careful. "Miss Whitfield," Rosa Claire said. Rosa slid into view, eyes already settled on Claire's hands and face and the shape of the dark behind her. "He sent me," she said. "The big one. Rafe. He is fine. The brother is alive. The teacher is stubborn and breathes like she intends to do it tomorrow, which is good." "The house," Claire said. "They took drawers and left chairs," Rosa said. "Your Hattie hid enough. She has clever hands." They moved before the light got sharp. Rosa knew the gullies that hid 2 people and the shelves where a person could flatten and disappear when a horseman passed below. They came up through scrub and rock to a cut that led to an old mine mouth, timbers gray and ridged like sleeping ribs. Someone had cleared brush there. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old earth. Rafe was within lamplight, riding his shoulders in gold. Abigail lay on a pallet with a wet cloth over her head. Her lips were pale, but her eyes opened and fixed on Claire. "I have been reading while I fall asleep," she said, voice rough. "Your father was not blind. He wrote his guilt as if that would slow it. Chemicals, the river, names of men who take money for silence." She lifted a hand and let it fall. "It is a long list." Rosa's voice cut in practical and fast. "Tonight the mining men come to Silas's house. They dress like kings and eat until buttons fly. He will show numbers on a map and call it vision. They will call it progress. The house will be full. His study will be quiet for an hour between speech and dessert." Claire felt the brass key under her glove. "We go in through the back. You and I," Rosa said, "and the teacher if she can stand. We can pass for help. The molding on the right knee is the trick. Press and pull together. The drawer looks like the desk and is not." Rafe checked his revolver and set his jaw. "I will be at the east stable," he said. "If it goes wrong, run toward the smell of horses. I can make noise." Abigail pushed herself up. Claire took her weight and found a person who had decided and did not need permission. Rosa tied back her hair and traded her dress for a black apron and a cap that hid the line of her face. Claire wiped soot on her sleeves and made her linen look like work, not silk. They reached the back steps of the Beckett house after dark. Wagons had lined the drive. A scatter of lamps turned the lawn into a shallow sea. Voices rolled out of the open doors, and windows men speaking to men the rhythm of laughter that comes from whiskey and calculation. Rosa's key fit the service door. The corridor breathed meat and starch and hot plates. The kitchen was a clock with too many hands. No one looked long at two more. Rosa led them up the servants' stair. On the landing, the sound from the grand salon lifted like smoke and thinned. The study door opened with a mild click. The room smelled like leather and paper and a man who wore too much scent. Claire crossed to the desk. Her knees remembered Rosa's instruction. Her fingers found the molding that did not quite line up and pressed. A seam gave. A drawer slid a half-inch. She pulled. The black ledger lay inside, plain and arrogant. She opened it. Silas wrote a clean hand. He dated his sins. Payments to Reeves, to Dugan, to judges whose names Abigail would know. A smaller entry that made Claire feel cold even in a warm room. Disbursement to M for resolution of TW noted complete. Earlier, a neat line for slow tonic administered to Mrs. TW. The word continuous sat there like an insect pinned to a card. Abigail's breath hissed. There, she said. There. A step sounded in the hall. The latch turned. Miles stood in the doorway and stopped. His face did not move, then moved all at once. He took in Rosa, the apron, the ledger open on the desk. He looked like a man who has walked into a word he did not mean to say. Claire closed the book and held his gaze. Your father wrote his own rope. Miles's eyes shifted to the ledger and back. He did not call. He did not run. He stood with his hand on the jamb and looked very tired. The grand salon is to your right, he said after a moment. He is on the little platform by the map. The men are gathered. Make your choice there if you intend to make one. Why? Rosa asked, voice low. Miles's mouth tightened. Because my mother did not fall, he said. And because some debts do not clear in ledgers. They went. 2 footmen had been stationed at the double doors. A crash in the front hall pulled both away. Rafe had found his noise. Claire pushed one door and stepped into a room that gleamed at every edge. Men in evening coats turned. Silas stood by the map of Nevada territory and smiled at her as if she had been expected. Miss Whitfield, he said, that warm-bred voice. We were just talking of yield. We will talk of poison, Claire said. She set the black ledger on a round table where a dozen men could see. Water that turns white when it touches iron. Children who cough until they cannot. Money that moves to make eyes see different. Abigail stood beside her, steady on uncertain legs. Willow Flats is sick, she said. I can name houses and the miles between them. I can show you where the creek goes under fence and comes out wrong. Rosa stepped forward. And women who do not fall downstairs, she said. She drew breath and held it. Isadora Delgado was my sister. Silas Beckett took her for company and put her away when she learned too much. A murmur went through the room as if a wind had touched it. Judge Hollister of Denver lifted a hand. He had a face that said he had told many men no and lived. Let me see the book, he said. Silas's smile dropped and then came back like a trick. Miss Whitfield is not well, he said. We will not let grief turn arithmetic into libel. Judge Hollister turned pages and made a sound that was not surprise. This is your hand, he said, eyes on Silas. These are your numbers. Silas moved his right hand toward his waist. Rafe's voice came from the doorway, flat and level. Do not. Silas's eyes cut to him. The room held still. The chandelier chimed like ice. Miles stood behind his father and to the left. His face had gone pale as old paper. He lifted a small pistol and sighted on Silas's chest. For a breath, no one moved. Then he fired. The shot cracked and ran along the ceiling. Silas jerked as if a string had been pulled from behind. A red star spread on his vest. He staggered and knocked the map off its stand. He sat down hard and slid to the polished floor legs, wrong hand slow to find anything to hold. Silence dropped over the room and stayed. The chandelier's crystals rang once, then stopped. The ledger lay open under Judge Hollister's hand. Claire heard the sound of someone's breath, not her own, and the ticking of a mantel clock counting out something it did not understand. No one moved. Then Judge Hollister lifted his head and found his voice. Guns on the floor, he said. Rafe's arm eased but did not waver until the room obeyed. 2 pistols clinked on parquet. Miles's small gun lay in his open hand. He let it fall and stepped back from it as if it were hot iron. For my mother, he said, quiet and clear. A murmur climbed the walls and fell again. Hollister snapped the ledger closed without looking up. Sheriff Dugan, he said, eyes cutting to the doorway where the man in the star had appeared too late. If you are going to act like an officer tonight, take that book and these gentlemen's statements into custody." Dugan shifted as if he had found a stone in his boot. He opened his mouth and closed it. Hollister's look held him fast. Or Hollister said softer and colder, "Stand aside while Denver does the work for you." Dugan took the ledger as if it might bite and backed into the hall. Hollister called for 2 men he trusted. Names came, hands lifted. The room breathed again. Silas lay where he had fallen, chest rising in small pulls that never filled. Miles stood as if the floor were unsteady and the ceiling too low. He did not look at his father. He looked at Claire. Then he turned and held his wrists out. The footman who had once worked the riverboats understood the gesture and the weight of it. He tied silk scarf to silk scarf and made a binding. Rosa did not look away from Silas until his breath stopped. When it did, her face did not change. Outside, night air hit like cold water. Horses stamped at the edge of the drive. Rafe took Claire's arm as if they were in a church after the service and guided her across the stone. Abigail walked under her own power, a line of sweat on her upper lip and a set to her mouth that said she would not ask for help while she could keep her feet. They did not run. They walked away until the house fell behind trees and the wind swallowed the voices. 2 weeks took the rough edges off what came next and left the bones. Men carried trunks of paper down the steps of Beckett and Company. Seals went up in red wax on white doors. A wagon from Denver rolled into town with 2 marshals who did not owe anyone in Cinder Hollow a favor. They took statements. They took Dugan's badge. They took Hollister's notes and nodded when he spoke. The courthouse bell sounded at noon on the day the judge read from a sheet that had more ink than blank. The note against the Whitfield estate had been built on fraud and would not stand. There was no applause. Hattie's fingers closed around Claire's hard enough to leave small moons in the skin. Tom O'Rourke breathed out and wiped his face with his sleeve as if the heat had broken. At Willow Flats, a pump went in beside the school. The machine chuffed and sighed. Pipes took water away from the bad stretch of creek. A new tank stood on a fresh platform and filled. On a table by the steps, a jar sat under the sun. The water inside held light like a thing kept safe. Children lined up with tin cups, and when they drank, the noise they made sounded like any noon in any year. Abigail chalked a verse on the board and did not need to cough between words. Rosa rode south with the marshals 2 mornings later. She wore black without lace and carried a small bag. She hugged Abigail first, then Claire, then Rafe and Jonah together, her cheek a moment on each shoulder. "I will say the words," she told Claire. "All of them. Your Hattie gave me a parcel for her sister. I will see it carried. Tell her that." "I will," Claire said. Rosa looked back once from the edge of town. The wind pulled her skirt along her calf and set the dust moving around her boots. She put her chin up and went. At the Whitfield place, a carpenter replaced the porch rail that had never been quite steady. Hattie directed men as if she had been born to it. She kept a ledger with a pencil she sharpened with a knife. When anyone called her ma'am, she did not correct them. The barn lot smelled like wet earth and new boards. Tom stacked fresh hay against the wall and left a space for a table with a lock. The brass key that had opened the study safe now hung on a nail by the kitchen door. It fit the new lock in the barn, the one that kept sacks of flour and jars of beans and a sealed box with medicines that had labels Abigail had written. Hattie touched the key each time she passed it, not out of fear but habit. The larkspur shaft mouth had a chain across it with a sign that the wind worried but could not pull loose. Men in work shirts set a line of barrels filled with sand and charcoal where the creek narrowed and silt made a lip. The smell of wet ash left the air a little more each day. Fish noses began to break the skin of the water again at dusk, quick and secret. On an evening yellow as butter, Claire stood at the fence between the yard and the slope and watched a cloud throw a shadow that ran like a horse across the far line of hills. Her ankle did not trouble her now unless she forgot and tried to take 2 steps at once. The pistol sat in the top drawer of her father's desk with cloth wrapped around it. The ledger was gone from the house, and the wall behind her mother's portrait felt like a wall again. She heard hooves on the road before she saw the riders. Rafe and Jonah came up the lane with their hats pushed back a little and dust on their boots above the ankle. The horses blew and lowered their heads. Hattie wiped her hands and stepped to the porch and called to Tom to set another plate, which he did without asking for what reason. Jonah swung down and walked sound and sure now, though he still guarded his side without meaning to. "We came to say goodbye," he said, gentle about it. "Where to?" Claire asked. "West," Jonah said. "Where the rain is different and the mountains look like something a man could get over." Rafe stayed a moment with his hand on the horse's neck. He watched the animal breathe. Then he looked at Claire. "Too many ghosts here," he said. "Ghosts do not push a shovel," Claire said. You could help with what remains. Hattie, who had an ear for timing, went inside and shut the door softly so the sound of it would not interrupt. Rafe walked to the fence and put his palms on the top rail. The wood creaked a little and held. The evening gave his eyes that deep color they had under cedars. "What are you asking?" he said. "Stay," Claire said. "There is a vein to cap and a river to help, and a town that will not do right if it does not see someone do it first. There is a house where the doors will not be locked against you." Jonah looked from one to the other. He smiled in a way that took years off his face and then stepped back to study the elm as if he had just noticed it. Rafe's mouth softened. "They will talk," he said. "They already do," Claire said. "Let them name what they like." He reached out and touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers as if to test the idea of it before he held to it. She did not move away. The porch light came on behind them and made long shapes of their shadows on the packed earth. A nighthawk cut once over the fence line and drew a curve out over the field. "Change of plans," Rafe told Jonah without turning his head. "I heard," Jonah said. They went inside because Hattie called them, and the kitchen smelled like chicken and sweet onions cooked down, and a pie that had cooled to the right temperature. Hattie set 3 plates and then sighed and set a 4th, because Tom came in abashed and asked if there was room for one more. They ate, they talked, they did not lean on the names that had burned the last months into them. The mantel clock kept time, and for once the counting felt like a generous act. Later, when the table was wiped and the lamps turned down, Claire stepped onto the porch and stood with Rafe in air that held a trace of iron from the pump and cut hay from the field. The brass key on its nail clicked once, then settled when the night breeze found it. Somewhere down the hill, a jar sat on a windowsill catching moonlight water inside, clean and quiet. The courthouse bell kept its hour to itself. The world held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.